There we go. I'm going to pass this to Jerry Capel in a minute to lead us in a centering exercise. Then we'll have just a brief update about what Third Act has been doing and some of the Third Act campaigns that we're involved in. Then the meat of our meeting this evening will be a conversation with Debra Rienstra. She's one of our, again, one of our Third Act Faith coordinating committee members who does some really wonderful work with her book and her podcast and her blog. So we're so pleased to have her talk to us this evening. Then we'll have a breakout where you can have a chance to visit with each other, and then we'll wind up with some action steps. So glad that you're all with us, and I'm going to pass it to Jerry to go ahead and lead us in a centering exercise.
There we are. Unmuting, please. Thank you. That is actually news to me. So what I am going to do is just simply pull an opening prayer from the season of creation as assembled by Margaret Bullock Jonas, who is also on this call, as a way of opening us up, because I did not know that was coming my way. I'm sorry, there's an email somewhere I must have missed.
Sorry about that, Jerry. I thought you volunteered at our coordinating committee meeting.
Wow, I may have, but
and you may have missed an email. Anyway, thanks for jumping in and finding something together.
So I got the Lord be with each and every one of you. Let us gather ourselves in the words of what you might hear in a lot of Episcopal churches in the month of September, because this is the season of creation, and these are words that have been put together by that denomination. So I'm going to use those words, I guess, to help bring us together. So we just invite you to stop for a minute and to allow those words to call your hearts and minds to the moment that we are all in. So let us pray. God of unchangeable power, when you fashioned the world, the morning stars sang together, and the host of heaven shouted for joy. We pray in this hour that you open our eyes to the wonders of creation and teach us to use all things for good, to the honor of all that is holy. God, the air sings with songs of glory, water flashes silver with creation, and the forests bloom with leaves for healing nations. We pray that your light and love fill our hearts and souls and minds, that whatever our meeting, the words of our meeting and the intentions of our hearts this evening, we may share with grace to the world. You have called us to labor with you in tending the earth. Where we lack love, open our hearts to the world. Where we waste, give us discipline to conserve. Where we neglect, awaken our minds and wills to insight and care. May we, with all your creatures, honor and serve you in all things. For in all things you live and reign. In all of this, Creator of all, we thank you for the beauty of creation. Show us, we pray, how to respect the fragile balance of life. In this we pray together. Our hearts and minds are one. Amen.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you for pulling something so beautiful together at the last moment. We appreciate that.
Episcopalians can do that sort of thing.
That's great. We're going to have just a few updates from what we've been up to, and I think we have the March to End Fossil Fuels in New York is the first thing. Pat, are you doing that?
Well, not to repeat what Jerry said, that I didn't know that, but happy to talk about it.
The agenda, or Ace, do you want to update folks?
I'm happy to, but Pat was really one of the marchers. I
Happy
did
to,
something
yeah.
else that week, so
Couple minutes just to let folks know.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it was a beautiful, beautiful day. It was sunny and warm and just barely breezy. And I think that really helped the turnout. We got, as you've probably seen, about 75,000. At least that's the number I've seen, and I'm sticking with it. It was a celebration, really. I think a lot of us had been missing that feeling of being in the streets with one another. And there was a lot of creativity, a lot of joy, a lot of, hey, I've only met you on Zoom and now I get to actually shake your hand. It was really pretty wonderful. We marched for about 1.5 miles and ended up close to the UN, where there were some speakers, including Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who I didn't actually hear, but from what I've read, she said some really great things. We had third actors from, I know of at least, from Ohio, Illinois, Virginia, Maryland, labor, educators, probably many, many others that I wasn't aware of. And, you know, what else can I say? A good time was had by all. I think it was really, well, for me at least, it was really a joyous celebration, and I was glad to be part of it.
Great, thanks, Pat. And sounds like Margaret was there and some other folks. And then I know there were some folks who did things where they were as well in solidarity with the actions in New York. Mary Jane, I think you are prepared. Are you? To update folks on the voting rights and elections.
Okay, now I'm unmuted. Yes, we just started organizing. We have a lot to work to do as an affinity group. We're going to have to decide how we want our direction, how we can best contribute to the campaigns and that. But I think the most important things to alert people to right now is there are two actions that need us as volunteers immediately or now. One is part of our mission will be to uplift voters to work toward getting people registered and out to the polls and that. So Third Act is sponsoring 2 initiatives right now that you can join, and we will have the details and links in the newsletter that's going out Thursday. One is it's called a Senior to Senior Intergenerational Campaign. It's organized through the Civic Center, and it's a push to get high school seniors registered. What I've heard is that if you can get young voters voting, they will be lifetime voters, and they also tend to be progressive voters. So that's why the push by Third Act to go to work with the senior registration. The other one that you can definitely jump in, I did 25 postcards today. It's a postcard campaign. They have committed us as an organization to 10,000 postcards. That's about 300 per group. I've done 50 for a local campaign, and I'm doing 50 right now. So we will be 1/3 of the way. You just have to go to Activate America and sign up and do some more so that we could get our requisite at least 300 postcards mailed out. But you go to Activate America, it's really easy. And you can pick the elections, and in our newsletter, we will have the different campaigns. We're focusing on particular elections in particular states, but you can pick your targeted election when you go to Activate America or to the Third Act site hosting sort of this particular campaign. and sign up for the election. You want to do a postcard in. It's really easy. You have to get your own postcards. You have to do your own stamps, but they'll send you the list, and they have all really well described. It's not hard at all. So that's and there's more, and that's coming out in the newsletter. You just read it Thursday when you get the newsletter. That's all.
Thanks, Mary Jane. And I realize we probably should do a little bit of an explanation for anyone who may be on the call for the first time and doesn't know how Third Act is organized. Third Act is the umbrella organization started by Bill McKibben about 2 years ago. Within that larger organization, there are regional groups. Some of you are in regional groups as well. And some of them are affinity groups. We are one of the affinity groups. So we are a subgroup under Third Act, and we are obviously folks from all over the country, but we take part in the campaigns that Third Act has organized. And so right now they've got 3 going. Voting and Democracy is one, and Mary Jane and Betsy, are you the other liaison for that? I believe we have 1 or 2 people who is a liaison from our working group to the larger campaign, who will be keeping us posted on how we can be part of that. I know that our next person is ready, Tricia. Tricia's working with a new campaign on democratizing energy, and we are actually looking for another person to help her. She's the only person we have. So if that's something you're interested in, let us know. There'll also be a sign up in the newsletter.
That's right. So democratized energy has been really busy this summer. This group, which also calls itself Power Up Communities, is focused on citizen participation in government decisions, especially at the state level. And it has 3 foci. One of them has really taken off and being developed. That first one is public utility commissions. And you'll see that on the list on the screen. So public utility commissions, Power Up Communities, both of those are PUC, but not to confuse them. They're not the same thing. And I'm going to go a little further into what they're doing with public utility commissions in a few minutes. The other 2 are state climate policy and legislative activity. And the third one is federal climate policy and Inflation Reduction Act support and defense, protection, whatever is needed. So the major emphasis so far has been on encouraging members to understand the importance of public utility commissions and to consider engaging with them. We started up in June with a very informative teach-in meeting featuring this person that some of you may recognize, Dr. Leah Stokes. She was not only very instrumental in the writing and passing of the IRA, and she is also author of the book Short Circuiting Policy, Interest Groups in the Battle Over Clean Energy and Climate Policy in the American States, a very good book. But she is also an expert in public utilities and the public utility commissions that are supposed to be regulating them. So public utility commissions exist in every state. I don't know how many of you are familiar with them. They might go by various names, as you can see on this Wikipedia page. They can be called public service commissions or utility regulatory commissions or corporation commissions. So most people don't know they exist. They consist of 3 to 5 or maybe more board members that are charged with overseeing utility decisions about rates, building and retiring of power plants, and so on. But because most utilities are monopolies, the commissions were set up originally to make sure the utility is fair to its customers. But unfortunately, there is a revolving door between many of these PUCs and the utilities themselves. So the utilities are in effect regulating or not regulating themselves. One of the aims of the Democratized Energy is to shine a light on the commission's work. That may involve getting people, who are favorable toward renewable energy appointed or elected to them. Some states appoint them and some elect them. It may involve showing up at public meetings and urging the commissions toward renewable energy, and involve some other things. They're also, Third Act is also interested in helping third actors across the states form coalitions to find commissions. But since every state is different and every state's commission is different, it will involve a lot of creativity within each state. The Democratizing Energy Working Group met again earlier this month and started laying out a plan for beginning to work in this area. As you can see, there's a meeting coming up this Thursday that involves Gina McCarthy, the former administrator of the EPA and former national climate advisor to President Biden. And she is now managing co-chair of the America is All In coalition. So it'll be really exciting to hear from her. During the Q&A at that meeting in September, someone from the teachers working group asked a question that was, I thought, really pertinent to Third Act Faith's relationship to democratize energy. And it was a question I was wondering as well. Since a lot of this work will be happening at the state level, and the teachers are, like us, not a geographical working group, but an affinity group, the question was how they can contribute. And that's a question that we also need to ponder. And I've posed that to them, and I'm looking to hear an answer or to come up with one. One of the possibilities may be that we would focus our attention on promoting the IRA, especially with congregations, since the IRA provides for congregational money for going electric and conserving energy. So as Jane Ellen said, as of now, I am the only liaison to this working group from Third Act Faith. So I'm really hoping that it is, now that it's up and running, there might be someone on the call tonight who isn't already in Third Act Faith leadership who might be interested in being a liaison with me on this kind of important work. And I would especially hope that somebody who is a good strategic planner might be inspired by this and might do it. And in addition, I want to share some links that you might find helpful to pick up more about what is this group doing with regard to public utilities commissions. These first two are blog posts that are on the Third Act website, and they're extremely helpful introductions. The third is a recording of the meeting in June that contains quite a bit of useful information from Leah Stokes. And the last shows the slide deck from the organizational meeting in September. So I will drop these into the chat in a moment. And that is what I have to say about this.
Great. Thank you so much, Tricia.
Jane Ellen, do you mind if I jump in for just a sec?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't give enough time for this section. And so Dan is the next one up for climate, finance, and divesting. Dan, can you do your bit in 60 seconds or less?
Probably.
Thank you.
Kathleen is our timekeeper, so we will pass it to Dan.
Tricia always sets a high bar, but I think that also indicates that if you do want to partner with Tricia, you'll be in good hands. Well, I was aware of the fact that I had to present something, but I wasn't able to make the meeting last week that our group was involved in because I was virtually attending a Creation Care conference in Virginia that Tricia presented a number of Bible studies at and did a great job. But we did meet, and my partner in crime, Jim Antel, was able to go to that meeting and attend. So question for everybody. Raise your hand, do you shop at Costco? Got a few hands going up. Okay. Do you think Costco is one of the good guys, one of the bad guys, or somewhere in between? Don't really know. Okay. Kind of ambivalent. In general, Costco is a pretty good guy for the most part. Their claim is that they want to do the right thing, and they are preparing to be transparent about their scope 3 emissions. If you know anything about scope 1, scope 2, scope 3, Costco's the good guys, but Costco uses Citibank for their credit card. And that gives us as Third Act an opportunity to put leverage on Costco, calling for them to be good guys and to try to leverage their relationship with Citibank to get Citibank to begin pulling out of fossil fuels. That campaign starts tomorrow. And I'm sure that in the general call for Third Act on the 28th, there will be a good bit of discussion about that campaign. The challenge for us as Third Act Faith is how do we participate in that? Similar to what Tricia was saying, we're a national organization, but that means that there's Costco's everywhere that we as faith communities can get involved in messaging and in participating in local events and things like that. So Costco's the big thing coming up. Pay attention to it. There's more to say, and I won't say it now.
Thank you, Dan. And I will just tell you, I'll watch for the newsletter. Mary Jane mentioned it coming out on Thursday, which will have a recap of this meeting and information about all the stuff you're hearing. So without further delay, I'm passing it to Betsy to take it over from this point.
Thank you, Jane Ellen. Well, tonight we have Debra Rienstra with us. Several of you know her already from the coordinating committee, but we'll have a presentation from Debra, and then after that we will have, I have some questions for her. We'll have a little conversation, and then we'll open it up to questions from the rest of you. Debra is a professor of English at Calvin University in Michigan, and along with other books and essays and poems and blog posts, Debra is the author of Refugia Faith, which she will show you also, Seeking Hidden Shelters, Ordinary Wonders, and the Healing of the Earth. And she also has a podcast called Refugia, a podcast about renewal. It's a pleasure to welcome her as our speaker this evening. I find her work to be really unique and to be an interesting fit for our work in Third Act. So I'll hand it over to you, Debra.
Thank you, Betsy. I'm really so honored to speak tonight. I consider myself a colleague with you, and I'm really honored to be colleagues with all of you. You bring such amazing experience and world wisdom to this work. So I'm really glad to be sharing with you. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the concept of refugia, in case that's an unfamiliar word for you. And so in the process, I'll tell you a little bit about the book, but I think that will lead us to some good conversation about how Third Act itself, Third Act Faith, can be a kind of refugia community. So I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Okay. Okay. And I should also warn you that I've been really sick all week. Some of us on the preparation part before the call were saying we'd all been sick. So if I have to stop and hack through some coughing, you'll know what happened, but I'll do my best here. I'm equipped with water and everything. We'll see. So I don't have to tell you folks that we are living in the midst of a climate crisis. This was a really rough summer. You all know the news. I don't have to go over this. But we are dealing with a kind of crisis convergence too. And I think this is what's causing so much anxiety among people, religious people as well, but anxiety because of all these things converging at once. And I suppose we could say we're living at a kind of inflection point. This seems to be a moment in history where a lot of things are converging. Now, I suppose every generation could say that, but it does seem kind of peculiar the way that we are dealing with all of these things at once. So for people of faith, these kinds of inflection points are a really good time to ask, how do we think of ourselves? Who are we? What is our role as people of faith? And you know very well that people have different approaches to this. Sometimes people of faith decide that this is a good time to kind of bunker down with like-minded people, make sure you keep the other sorts of people out, and create some kind of safe space in a bunker of some kind. Sometimes people of faith in the midst of crisis decide that they are the museum curators. They are the ones whose job it is to sort of preserve the righteous heritage. And you can see that certainly in Christianity. I think people of other faiths can see this too. It's a response of fear and defensiveness. And of course, it's very frustrating when you have a kind of nostalgic view of how things used to be and how your particular faith used to be culturally dominant, and those were the good old days. And so you understand how people can kind of try to claw back to some imagined past. We're also seeing a couple other sorts of metaphorical approaches. So this is where it comes in handy to be an English literature professor. I tend to see people's metaphorical thinking, and I tend to ask the question, so what metaphors are operational here? And you know very well, in the United States, we have a lot of people of faith who have decided that they are warriors in these sort of culture wars. Or on the other hand, and actually sometimes at the very same time, victims of the culture wars. And we all know that that leads to some really nasty kinds of scapegoating. Interestingly, there's a scholar called Philip Jenkins who wrote a book about how Christians in particular, well, not just Christians, but mostly, had responded to times of climate change in the past. Obviously not what we're going through now, but times of sort of climate upheaval, like the Little Ice Age. And it's really distressing to read that book because you see the same kinds of reactions happening now, including scapegoating. So you don't hear a lot of scapegoating of witches now, but apparently that was a big thing in the past. We have other people that we try to scapegoat now. Another metaphor might be witnesses, but then you have to ask yourself over and over again, witnesses to what? What are we witnessing to? What kind of salvation? What kind of future? What kind of relationship with a divine are we witnessing to? So these metaphors, as you can, I'm sure, imagine, these all tend to lead to inaction on climate, among other things. And we actually have some good evidence of that, thanks to this study done by Pew Research Center. This was released in November of 2022. The data itself goes back to March of 2022. And I don't know if you've read this study, it's really fascinating, highly recommend. You can just Google this and read through it. They asked not only what people of faith were doing about climate change, but why. So they kind of drilled down into people's motivations, and that part was really interesting too. But overall, it was pretty grim. The data, the results of the data was pretty grim. One of the conclusions they drew was that religion overall actually seems to get in the way of taking climate change seriously or engaging in anything more than small personal actions. So this is really interesting for Third Act faith, because people tend to think they're doing something about climate when they're recycling or doing something else that's personal and small like that. This statistic has been bugging me ever since I read this study, and it'll probably bug you too. Only 8% of all Americans are both highly religious and very concerned about climate change. That feels to me like a really, really small number. What if it were 58% of Americans were both highly religious and also very concerned about climate change? So you can read the study to see exactly what is meant by highly religious. It has to do with how you account for your religious observance, and also very concerned is kind of a term that they define. But I thought that was a very discouraging statistic. This will not surprise you either. Evangelical Protestants were the least likely to believe that global warming is caused by human activities. That won't surprise you because of the politicization of evangelical Protestantism. And this next one is discouraging too. Among religious service attenders across faiths, 78% seldom or never talk about climate change within their faith community. Now, for some reason, for some people, there might be a good reason for that, which is that you will get dismissed, mocked, yelled at, whatever. I hope that's not the case for you, but that still is a very grim number. And this will not surprise you either. It seems we are more shaped by economic and political influences than by religious claims. So my question is really, what metaphor might help us think of ourselves as people of faith at this crisis inflection point? And as soon as I learned what refugia are, I started to think about that as a possible alternative metaphor. So refugia is a biological term. I learned it from Kathleen Dean Moore's wonderful book, Great Tide Rising. Highly recommend. She's a moral philosopher, retired from Oregon State, I believe, and beautiful nature writer. You've probably encountered her before. On 4 pages in the middle of her book, Great Tide Rising, she describes refugia. And her example comes from the eruption of Mount St. Helens in 1980. We're all old enough to remember that. And maybe you remember how devastating that eruption was, and how afterwards the mountain was just this hellscape. It was like a moonscape. Layers and layers of ash everywhere, trees just blown down the mountain. And biologists looked at it and said, you know what, we are not going to see this greening up for a long time, decades, maybe centuries. But in fact, 25 years later, the mountainside had greened up. And the reason for that, as researchers went and looked at it, they realized that there were these little places, even under that layer of ashes, where little plants had survived, little creatures had survived. Maybe they were tucked under a log. Somehow they managed to be safe. And it was out of those little places that the mountain greened up again. Well, those are called refugia. So I have the definition here from the biologist Capel. This is a scientific paper where he tries to account for research on refugia up until that point and kind of settle a definition. So habitats that components of biodiversity retreat to, persist in, and can potentially expand from under changing conditions. So they're basically places where life survives in a crisis, little pockets. And I think it's important to note that they're also places where capacities rebuild, because this will help us think about how that metaphor can be useful to us. So refugial conservation biology is a whole field of biology. It's the study of how things survive in a crisis. So in this image, you can see a mountainside that was devastated by fire, and yet some trees survived. Why? Is it because they're facing a certain direction? Is it because there's water around them or underneath them? The second image there has to do with heat. The third one with insect infestations. So refugial conservation biologists try to figure out why refugia, try to figure out how things survive by looking at those refugia for particular species in particular places. And by knowing that, we can actually create management strategies that help those things survive. So to sum that up, in nature, refugia are meaningful because they create little protected spaces, but they're not insular spaces. They are spaces that can expand and connect. So by doing that, they transform and they revive an ecosystem in ways very particular to the context, in place and time and species too. So basically they're a mechanism of resilience. And so I started to think about that as a way to think about our role as people of faith. How could we become the people who especially attend to and nurture places of resilience, and maybe even create them? Because after all, this moment demands that we become resilient healers. So how can we do that? Not only biologically in the earth, but in human cultural systems and in our spiritual lives as well. So I started to think about this more and more, and it eventually became a book. This is what I did during the COVID quarantine. This is how I coped. I wrote a book. People did different things, this is how I coped. And I asked myself this question: how must our faith and practice adapt for crisis times if we think of ourselves as the people of refugia? So I started to think about this in terms of 7 transformations that we need to undergo. What must we leave behind and what must we rebuild? Those are the transformations. And I also came in with a kind of confidence that our faith traditions, and mine is Christian, so I worked out of that tradition for this. But I came into this with a kind of confidence that there are treasures old and new in our faith traditions that can help us thoughtfully undergo these transformations to adapt to this particular time. Just a little word here about the book. With a value added bonus of nature writing, because I wanted to model how important it is that we actually become connected to place and overcome this kind of alienation from place that is so common in modern life. And actually, we could argue that it's common in our faith lives too, depending on who you are. Also, there's wonderful original interior art by a Calvin University undergraduate. She's now graduated, but little value added bonus if you get the book someday. So those transformations nicely mapped out onto the Christian liturgical year for me. So if you are a liturgically minded person, you will see the little liturgical code stealthily working its way through the book. But I think these transformations really could apply to any faith tradition. And I think, honestly, they apply outside of faith traditions too. These are the things we kind of have to work on. From starting with despair. If we're feeling despair, we can see this instead as a time of preparation rather than alienation from our place and the earth. We start to think about kinship, from consuming to healing, and so on. So I'm actually just going to talk about a couple of these tonight that I think are most pertinent for us. So I'm actually going to jump over here to transformation number 6, from passivity to citizenship, because I think this is one that you are all really, really good at. If you happen to see the last Third Act Faith newsletter, I think it was the last one, there was a little talk in there that I gave at the Wild Goose Festival this summer. And I used this verse from John 15. This is Jesus with his disciples the night before the crucifixion, saying to them, you know, you have called me master, but I want to call you friends. I don't want you to be just servants to me. I want you to be friends, and to welcome these disciples into this kind of circle, this community. And so to think about our role as friends of God is really uncomfortable maybe, and really challenging, because we're tempted to see God as this deity up in the sky that we bow down to. And it's not that that's wrong, but that's incomplete. And it's a problem because that tends to make us passive in this world. We just wait for God to fix things. And I don't know if this is true in other faiths, but it's certainly true in some areas of Christianity where there's a real passivity about this world, because there's the sense that we are just the servants of God. It's all up to God. I don't think this is orthodoxy, but this is a common notion. But it seems instead, and I think this is also true in every faith tradition, that we are called to agency and responsibility. And one of the reasons I think we avoid that is because it's hard, it's difficult, it's costly, it's frightening, it demands something of us. So in the Christian tradition, I think of the Holy Spirit as the one who enables us to do that. And that's why transformation number 6 is kind of mapped onto Pentecost, the season of the Holy Spirit. So the application of this is what you're already doing, being citizens. I think Third Act, this is exactly what we do at Third Act Faith. We call people from passivity to citizenship. And I think there's work to do to normalize advocacy as a religious practice. It is normalized in some areas of faith. I think the Black American Church has successfully normalized advocacy because they've had to. But especially in white churches of all kinds, this is maybe seen as too political or whatever. But I think it's time to normalize advocacy. I'm sure you all agree with me about that. I think the other thing we have to do, and this is what we're also doing in Third Act Faith, is normalize partnering with people outside our own little faith enclaves. So whether that's outside our denomination or across faiths like we do here, Or apart from that, I think we have to see ourselves as people of faith as partners with other groups who are doing this work and not try to reinvent the wheel all the time, as you sometimes see denominations do, for example. And I would refer here to Jim Antall's beautiful work, his speaking and writing on this idea of communal vocation. Vocation is a very familiar word in Christian circles, but the idea of a communal vocation of a generation, I think, is really, really helpful, and the sort of moral urgency that we're facing right now. So I wonder if we can think of Third Act Faith as a kind of refugia space. Refugium is the singular, but I don't know, I think refugia is a nicer, prettier word. So I tend to use refugia as every part of speech. Anyway, I wonder if we could think of Third Act Faith as a kind of dispersed refugia space where we create this space together for the sake of our own life-giving work with each other, but also that we are creating capacity and connecting and spreading, which is how refugia do their work. They connect and they spread. Then Transformation 7, very quickly. This one is from indifference to attention. And here I thought about all the faith practices that we do that kind of equip us for the long haul. So for example, Sabbath rest is a really wise practice, God ordained, we believe, that in the end equips us for crisis by giving us the sort of resilience for the long haul. Gratitude, to lean into our religious practices of gratitude. Sacramental practice and ritual are really important for me as a Christian. I'm sure that's true for all of us in faith traditions. Those rituals are life-giving and they hold you up. They hold you up in a crisis. And then, of course, attentiveness. Our practices of prayer are all about attentiveness. And then communal work. One of the things that religious people, well, I'd like to say we're really good at. Sometimes we're bad at it, but I'd like to say that we're really good at communal work, working together. And these are all the things that in the Christian world, we think about this during ordinary time. Ordinary time is that really long stretch. There's more than one stretch, but the longest stretch of it is between Pentecost and Advent. That's a really long time. So that's how I mapped this set of practices onto ordinary time. So just to review, the people of refugia metaphor, if we want to think of that as a sort of new way of approaching who we are in the larger community, the larger world as people of faith, if we think of ourselves as partners in earth healing, partners with God, partners with the earth itself, with all of its healing properties, including refugia, and then partners with people outside our lane, whether that means our particular faith enclaves or outside of faith altogether. So I think to sum up how refugia can work in human culture, once again, it's not that they're bunkers, they're just relatively safe spaces where health, life-giving health, can kind of be recultivated. And that means certain things in biology, but in human spaces, that could be cultural health, spiritual health, community health. There are also places that create a kind of freedom to experiment in human culture. And this one I think is really important. You know how easy it is for people to get discouraged because they feel like, what can I do that would make a difference? And we all have answers to that. One is join Third Act Faith, right? But the thing about refugia in nature that's so encouraging and cool is that things that are small are not insignificant. They can have huge significance if they can persist and connect and grow. And I think we see that all over the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures, that God loves to work through small things. But I think it's really encouraging to feel like even our small efforts can be important and can build into something bigger. Refugia build inclusivity through permeable edges, not bunker edges, but permeable edges. And they create influence through a network of connections. And finally, and this is really important, we all need joy. So to find strength and joy in on a small manageable scale is really essential for keeping on going, as you all know, I'm sure. So I would just leave us with a question to think about. Maybe after Betsy and I talk a little bit, we could talk about this, or we could talk about some of your questions. But I think one of the things that's really important for religious people these days, as we come to the table as people of faith and join these partnerships with all kinds of other people, what distinctive gifts do we bring? What does our faith offer that's distinctive or unique or really helpful in those spaces? What gifts do we bring that are transferable gifts that can nurture and create these Refugia spaces? So I'll leave it at that. Here's some links that maybe we can put in the chat in a little bit. I'll stop screen sharing now, and Betsy and I can have a little conversation. Let's see. Go. Okay.
Thank you, Deborah. That was wonderful. And I was delighted as you were speaking. You probably were too busy focusing on your presentation to see what was going on in the chat. But lots of appreciation for just the concept of refugia and the metaphor. And so I was delighted to see that. So some of the questions I had for you touched on in your presentation. It'd just be a matter of sort of enlarging on a couple of things. One of the things that I really appreciated when I first read Refugia Faith is that the small work of Refugia seems to grasp and connect with the urgency and size of what we face with global warming and habitat loss in ways that those other small scale activities, like you named recycling and so forth, that people think, you know, that so many local parishes and congregations do. And I guess it's a sort of a two-part question. I am still kind of rereading the book and exploring for myself how exactly does that work? That here's this sort of small local thing that seems to work in a very different way from all the other small local things, where it is, you know, it's not just a cliche, but that the small work really does seem very significant. And you say in your book that we need to work on both scales at once. So if you could talk a little bit about that, both in your own life as somebody who promotes all this work in Refugia, but also does the advocacy work of Third Act. How does all that fit together?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for that. That question of scale is really important. And I've been sort of worrying that question from the very beginning, because Refugia are small and local and contextualized, and they're not going to solve the problem. They don't. And actually, sometimes they don't work. Some Refugia are ephemeral in nature, right? They last for a little while and then they fail. It happens. But I think it's a good metaphor for us because it reminds us that we can have agency on a small scale. So for people to deal with the crisis convergence we're dealing with, they need to feel they have agency. So to be doing something as small as, creating a native garden in my yard, Refugia for the bees, right, and the wasps, that makes me feel like I'm doing something, but that's obviously not enough. So that agency is important. Modeling is important on a small scale. And, all of these gigantic climate issues are felt locally. So that is how we literally interact with them, is somehow locally. So to be involved on that very local scale is really important, because your local scale is particular. So just as Tricia was saying about the public service commissions, they're all, or public utility commissions, they're all different. So you have to be engaged at that local scale if you're going to do that local work. But the global scale is really crucial too. So I actually interviewed May Boovy. Some of you may know her as the executive director of 350.org. So Kathleen, you heard this on the podcast. And I asked her this very question. And I said, listen, based on what you do, like global work, Refugia have got to seem like silly and small, right? And she said, actually, no, because a lot of what she does is connect people with Ghana to people in Mozambique who need to learn what the Ghanaians are doing on the local level so that they can do it in Mozambique. And fortunately, you know, in biology, that would never work. If you have two bear refugia out west somewhere and there's no corridor between them, it's not going to help them reproduce little baby bears. You know, they need a corridor. But with human beings, we can create those corridors, like on Zoom calls, which is how May does her work every day. So we have the opportunity to create refugia that are not geographical. And that, I think, is the key to how this idea can actually be activated, both on a really local level, like in real life, but also across these distances, because we have these tools, these human tools.
Thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting insight. And I think that that capacity to connect with other refugia is kind of that vision that makes me look at this book and think this is something different that that gets us away from that insular sort of within my congregation we're going to do this little thing sort of thinking to we're going to connect with other places that are doing similar thinking. So you touched on this with thinking about what particular gifts people of faith bring to this work. What do you see as the unique contributions that people of faith can make to these moments, and particularly to the work of creating Refugia? I guess in a way it's asking, why is this book Refugia Faith and not just Refugia? Why did you find it important to link it, to make it particularly about the work of faith communities?
Yeah, well, you know, it wouldn't have to be, but since that's where I am, that's where we are, let's do that. I think that's a good question. I'm not sure I have all the answers yet. I mean, the book is really about a kind of individual journey into this thinking and what that could mean. But I think I'm still exploring what those distinctives are. And I think as people of faith, we're trying to figure that out right now, because what we knew as our faith lives 30, 40, 50 years ago, it's just not the same at all. I think it's probably true everywhere in the world. So we really have to think about that. Probably one of the most important things we can do is bring a kind of perspective of purpose. And, you know, I would say hope. I know that's a really difficult word, but the sense that we are at a point in history and that history has this kind of divine purpose. And whatever suffering is happening now is still caught up in meaning. It is not pointless. It is not a matter of doom. And I'll refer to May Bouvier again. You know, we talked about that in my conversation with her. And she was saying that her faith makes a difference in that when she stands on the edge of the abyss, which she does pretty often, she knows that that's not all there is. And I think for a lot of people, they just wonder, are we at the edge of an abyss and that's it? I mean, it's kind of nihilistic, right? So whatever faith answer you have to nihilism can be really helpful. Just in terms of our practices, though, I think gratitude, you know, just those things I was saying, gratitude, rest, communal feasting and ritual are so important. I had a great talk with Rabbi Dean Shapiro, who is now in New Zealand, and he talked about Jewish rituals and how he's adapting Jewish rituals to deal with climate grief and climate loss. And we're good at rituals as religious people. So what can we do to kind of adapt those in meaningful and in meaningful ways, but with integrity, so that it welcomes in people who are maybe kind of on the edge or, you know, not in faith at all. We're good at prayer, so that kind of attentiveness. So I don't know, I'm curious what everybody else thinks. Potlucks, I mean, you know, some churches are really good at potlucks. Can that contribute? I don't know.
Probably in some very significant
Probably.
way. Yes.
Doesn't love a good
I'm really intrigued by how we bring the idea of hope to this. as people who don't have the sort of false hopes that, you know, this, like, you know, oh, it'll all be all right somehow.
Yeah.
But, you know, looking at the reality of the science and looking at the reality of the political situation and so forth, I really think that hope is an important piece of what people of faith bring. And I'm just wondering, I'm thinking out loud here, I'm wondering if you have a thought about it. How does the work of Refugia, how does the creation of these life-giving spaces generate hope and work with the idea of realistic hope?
Yeah, you know, I am so familiar with the Bible for all of my life, and when I was working on the little passage on hope in the book, I of course did a search through the Bible, you know, like the worst exegetical technique ever, like just type in the word. But it was interesting to me how much of the Bible is about people in desperate circumstances. So neither Judaism for sure, nor Christianity are religions for people for whom everything is fine. You know, they are answers to desperate situations. So there's nothing new about finding hope in the midst of really, really tough situations. And I think that hope is this sense that we have meaning to God. Whatever the situation is, we still are cherished by God. So I have learned a lot about hope from people like Mariana East Heglar and other African-American writers who, you know, are for the most tragic American reasons used to defining hope in different ways. And for them, it's usually clarity and purpose and courage. It's not any sort of sense that everything's going to be all fine. It's this kind of clarity of purpose. This is what we have to do, and it's going to be hard. And hope is an action. Hope is that continued action in the midst of all kinds of discouragement. And I think it's, you know, it's maybe a moment for those of us who have been really privileged and, you know, never had to deal with those really difficult situations to learn from that and say, all right, time for us to learn how to have courage and be clear about our purpose and, you know, and just understand that maybe things aren't going to get better in certain ways, but we have kind of ethical commitments here that we are going to fulfill.
This idea, sorry, Betsy, Kathleen here. Kathleen here. I was just going to say this might be a good time to see if our audience has a question or two. And I thought I might pull out Al Ferrando. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Typed in the chat. What I like in this is the question of we are witnessing to what? This is a focus of dialogue with all others in addressing their common angst. To me, he says, Refugia addresses resilient health in local neighborhoods. We have in common that we can pilgrim together to build up a common good that works for all that are involved, regardless of their politics. Deborah, could you speak to that thought that Al has, and then maybe we can have a few other people ask some questions if they have any.
That's just really beautiful. Thank you for that. I think I'm going to answer that by evoking AOC for the second time tonight. This is a quote from her that turned up in that May Bovee interview too. Again, it was something that May actually tweeted, and I used it in that interview, but this is what AOC tweeted out. This was probably more than a year ago. She said this: "What I sometimes tell my staff is that the world we are fighting for is already here. It exists in small spaces, places, and communities. We don't have to deal with the insurmountable burden of coming up with novel solutions to all the world's problems. Much of our work is about scaling existing solutions, many created by small, committed groups of people that others haven't seen or don't even know are around the corner. So we can't change the world in a day. We can and do have the power to make our own world within our four walls, within our own blocks. We can grow from there with the faith that somewhere out there, everywhere, others are doing the same, and we will come together. I think that sounds exactly like what you were saying. And that's just Refugia thinking right there.
So Pat has pointed out, if y'all know the raise hand button down at the bottom of your screen and you raise that, we will try to catch that. And then you can unmute and ask your question. And so far, I don't see anybody who's doing that. So there is a question in the chat from Pam McVetti. All the actions to address the climate crisis are expanding rapidly, and it is becoming overwhelming. Where is it most productive to put one's energy? Seems like we all need to focus on getting our institutions and governments to cut carbon emissions. Comment, please.
Sounds good to me. Then the question is how? Like what sorts of persuasion do you have available to you? And, standard advocacy is one sort of persuasion. I'm just thinking of that beautiful essay by Mary Anais Heglar. What's it called? Something about to deal with the climate crisis, we need you, or something like that. And she adds, she deals with people that she knows who are artists who say, well, what can I do? And her answer is, do whatever you're good at. Just make revolution irresistible. So if you're an artist, do that. Just envision the revolution. So I think that's probably what we would all say is, whatever your gifts are, figure out how to aim them at that big, that sort of big goal that we're all working on together. And thank goodness there are groups like Third Act Faith that can give you suggestions for what to do, right? I mean, it's really, really helpful. So thank you for
that. Jerry, I see your hand is up. Go for it.
Yeah, thanks. What as I hear you talk, one of the tensions that it seems like a tension in this work that I seem to be working up against, especially in faith communities, is sort of a dichotomy, I suppose, between being and doing. And I find you lending a lot of energy, maybe it's my own prejudice, but toward the being side. And I suspect that's a rising star, that we have cut our teeth on the political activism of the 70s till now, and burnout is becoming such a reality, and climate grief is becoming overwhelming, that there is a rising awareness of the need for being. And I guess I just looking to see what you might say about that unnecessary but very present, I think, dichotomy, a false dichotomy between being and doing in the environmental work that's upon us.
It's a really interesting comment, because I think of myself totally as a doer. I'm not happy unless I have a job. So
funny.
For a task, I'm great. Well, I wonder if the idea of the Sabbath is a sort of faith-based way to consider that. So once a week, we just be, because we can't keep doing unless we have that time of refreshment, and that reconnection with our essence, our essential for value and purpose. I'm not good at that. I'd much rather be doing stuff. So as I said, during the pandemic, I just wrote a book. But I don't think we survive well that way. And I suppose maybe the biological analogy is, I learned from my friend who's a wildlife population biologist that animals do a number of things during the day, including loafing. Like having places to loaf is very important for animals. And I thought, how do you like that? Like when's the last time I thought to myself, I shall now loaf? So I think it's just, kind of a truth about being, I guess, that sometimes we just have to be. and stop doing. And from a climate anxiety point of view, I just think it's survival that we get tired. So to have a way to just be and to be together, that can be really helpful. I have to be by myself sometimes. That's really helpful to me, but it's part of life. It's part of allowing life to grow.
And I think
Penny.
maybe the being part is in the metaphor of smallness, which Refugia seems to be, and slowness.
Oh.
I mean, it's remarkably fast, but it doesn't seem like it, I guess, if you're on a desolate landscape and you're the only little pocket of growth there is.
Yep.
That might feel a lot more like being than doing.
Yeah. Barely being, right?
Barely being, yeah.
Hanging on. Yep.
So Penny, I see your hand up and I see Ace is up as well. And we've got about a minute left for questions, and then we need to jump into the breakout. So Penny, go for it, and then we might have time, Ace, for yours as well.
Yes, I so appreciate your book, and I'm reading it now. I'm absolutely delighted. I think one of the things that religious language can help us with is the language of forgiveness. And we basically have to acknowledge our own participation at whatever level we are aware, and becoming more and more aware that we are all part of the problem, as well as trying to find a solution. So that's a very deep language, I think, that religious communities can allow us to face the truth and to allow us to see what our history as a collective human history is, and its impact on all our natural world, all our ecosystems. But also from that, I think, comes hope, because my belief is that until you tell the truth about a situation and what is your role might be in it, you really cannot move to any kind of grounded sense of hope. The other language I think that we do draw from religious traditions is the language of the time. We are not in charge of the time of this universe. We are a small blip on this huge thing called a creation. We've evolved millions of years, and we're just a tiny, tiny piece of it. So understanding that our civilization may have its time, but we cannot foresee really the whole time of the universe, either before us or in future. So in that sense of humility, I think we have to work, but we also have to have a sense of a bigger time scale than we're really understanding, and to hope that if our civilization dies, that there will be other civilizations that will come from our learning, especially the sense of history. I do think past and future is very important for us, is not to get so focused on our own little world that we can't see that nature also has this capacity to regenerate. And I think that's what your Refugia is talking about. There are sanctuaries within the natural systems that we just don't even understand at this point. So thank you for your work.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you. I took some notes. Yeah. Wow. Truth, contrition, lament, confession, and forgiveness. Yeah. Thank you.
So I'll just
Ace,
jump in with something she said at the end, what Penny said at the end, because the beauty of metaphor is not just the abstraction that leads, that comes out of it, but the concrete example that begins the metaphor. And so what you gave us in terms of the biological process, I think is the most hopeful thing I've been able to kind of chew on for many a day. So thank you for that so much.
You're so welcome. Yeah, I depend on it too.
So at this point, I mean, we've only got 16 minutes left. We're supposed to be done by, it's 6:30 my time. So I think, Pat, it's time to drop us all into breakouts, and then we can share our thoughts within our small groups. And then if you could bring us back out at about 6:28, that ought to give us just enough time to talk about the action item. We may go a minute or two over. My apologies in advance. But Pat, go ahead and take us away.
Am I in a group, Pat?
You are supposed to be. Did you not get an option to join?
I was too busy doing something else. So
Oh, gotcha.
I
Hang
missed
on.
it. But Pat, don't worry about it. I'm happy to talk to you and Al, wherever Al is. Oh, he just disappeared. It's
Yeah,
nice
here,
to
let
see
me
you.
put you in, and I think I can do that. Let's see.
Okay, sorry about that.
No,
Somebody
that's
was
all right.
calling me and I was trying to like do a little bit of a multitask.
Yeah.
Nice to see you anyways.
Good to see you too. I don't,
You know what? It's totally fine.
let's
not
you and
to-
I talk.
Yeah, that is my suggestion. I'm happy
Yeah.
to talk to you. We haven't done that in a long time.
It's been a while. Yeah, it certainly has. How have you been?
I've been very good, thank you. I'm still, I'm doing a lot of stuff right now with school, so it's taking me away a little bit, but
Yeah.
I'm stepping down at the end of June, and so I just hope to get more involved in all of this work then.
You're stepping down from,
Teaching at HUC at my seminary, yep.
wow, you're giving that up completely?
Yeah, I refuse to say retiring, but basically that's what I'm doing. So, yeah, I'll be 66 and something, and
You're a youngster.
yeah, but there's younger people coming up that probably could use those slots. So,
Yeah.
I think it's right. I'll probably still do a little bit of teaching here or there,
Mhm.
but I think it's good to be able to. I have to finish a book and then also do this. I really loved what she did tonight. I thought it was so
Wow.
great.
Yeah. And your comment was exactly right. And it was exactly the way to end the question session.
Yep.
You know? Yeah. The whole, you're absolutely right that the whole way metaphor works is to have something concrete to bounce off of. And it was brilliant. I've known of Debra basically since we started Third Act Faith, and I've read a few of her newsletters, but I haven't had time to read the book, and I haven't, for whatever reason, I had never encountered the meaning of refugia from the biological, So when she gave us that tonight, it smacked me in the forehead. It was beautiful.
Yeah, I think what really was meaningful to me, as I said, was just actually something so concrete that can let you have some hope, that nature can do this work. And if we can too, right? That we will have these resources of resilience. I mean, it's incredible. Even just to spend an hour learning about how nature does it and kind of go out on a field trip and watch some of these areas and how they grew back. And, I think that's so positive an approach, because we get so caught up in the angst of it all and the anger and frustration that it's not moving fast enough. I don't know. I wanted to ask you, when you reported on the march, do you think it had any effect?
That's always the question, of course. And it's a question that's been haunting me since the high water mark of my activism, which was the 2014 march. That's almost a decade ago. And where are we? I think big actions like that do open the window. They broaden the conversation. They do bring some people in that might not have been there already. And I think they always have some political impact. When politicians look out and say, wow, there's 75,000, or, in 2014, 350,000. I better get in front of this if I'm not going to get trampled in the back of it. So I think there's, it's rarely, it's almost like climate science, where you can't really attribute a particular weather event to climate change, but you can say all of them are getting worse because of climate change. Well, with this, I can't attribute a particular outcome to 2014 or to this one just now, but I do believe that we're making that kind of broader difference. We're opening the conversation, we're moving the window, however you want to say it. And to me in particular, this one we just had really was getting the band back together. you know, meeting people in the streets and doing something that we all frankly love to do. Get out there and wave signs and you know, try to show our power. So it had,
Yeah.
for me at least, it had that effect.
I think listening to you, what occurred to me is that if it hadn't happened, right? If in 2023, when the United States Nations is getting together, there were no protests in the streets around climate. So that alone, you know, sends the message we haven't gone away, right? We're still here. I hope so. I did get to go to one event and I'm writing it up. They asked me to do it as one of their deep dives. I went to a meeting of the Global South Women Activists in Climate, and it was very cool. I really liked it. And so I mentioned the march in my essay, and I, you know, wasn't sure how to place it. So maybe I'll say something like that, you know,
Sure.
Yeah,
it was really, from my perspective, it was really creative and joyful, and that's the word I keep coming back to, joyful.
Yeah.
But your gathering sounds fascinating. Who was there?
Oh, all sorts of people. There's a group called Faith for Our Planet that came out of Pakistan, and they organized a series. And guess who one of their key speakers was? Ellen Bernstein.
Oh, how about that? Yeah.
So Ellen invited my friend Mirla and I to come as her kind of little delegation of Jews, because it was mainly Muslims and Hindus, but it was in the church center of the United States Nations. And there's this amazing woman there who, because of some accident, ended up with a stammer. And she discovered that when she whispered and when she sang, she could speak clearly without that stammer, which to me, talk about metaphor, just seemed like a metaphor for the whole thing. You know, somehow like find your voice and go with no matter whatever obstacles are thrown in your way, you keep going. If it's a whisper, if it's a shout, right? Or a song, better a song. So it inspired me to write this little thing, which I was just going to put in the newsletter along with your thing about marching, but MJ said, well, since it's so long, why don't I turn it into a deep dive? So I said, okay, fine. I just have to do a little bit more work now.
Yeah.
Is it time for people to come back?
Pretty soon. I'm giving them a 2-minute warning.
Good for you. I mean, the timing and the managing of the flow tonight wasn't terrible, you know. It could have been a little better probably, but you and I probably both have run so many meetings over the years. We just know how to like move us along a little bit. But the woman who spoke right before me, I don't know who she is, but she was excellent.
Yeah. Although, you know, I'm glad you mentioned her, because I wanted to say to you in particular that I felt like she was starting to get to a point that I'm uncomfortable with, where she was saying, you know, we have to remember that we're a tiny speck in the timeline. And, you know, that gets very close to the passivity that Debra was talking about, that I think we need to guard against.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean,
No?
I feel like there's a kind of spiritual cosmic view of all of this that can give us some comfort why we're still trying to stop it. And I actually appreciated that with her. I know people who talk in that way too, and I don't know, maybe the older I get, the more mystical side of me comes out.
Right.
So I think it's not a bad perspective. What I can't stand is when people talk about climate grief, honestly. It's like, come on. I mean, I try to be respectful and I can feel some of that myself. But I don't want anything to impede in the work that we're doing. So hi Al, we just see your forehead. If you want to move your camera so we get to see you too.
I'm gonna close the breakout rooms now and bring everybody
there you are.
There we go. I'm in Petaluma, California. I was in another group and my computer said, your battery's running low in the whole bit. So I got to go plug in. So I had to rush over and get my computer. So back in there. Hi, Pat. Hi, Adrian.
Hey, Al.
Real quickly, Pat, where are you located?
New York City.
And Adrian?
New York City.
Okay, West Coast, no,
Yeah.
here's
Hi,
Pam.
Pam. Yeah. Hello.
Everybody coming back.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's one experience that are we all coming back to a general group again?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thought.
Oh, okay.
Here we go.
All right.
Welcome back, everybody.
As we're coming back together, I want to tell you, we always wish we had more room in the breakouts, more time in the breakouts. So we've started a series of what we're calling mega breakouts, which is a meeting that is just the breakout. We had one over the summer, and I just put a link in the chat for one that Dan and Kathleen will be hosting on October 19th. So if you'd like to have more conversation with some other folks, sign up, and that information will be in the newsletter as well, but just wanted to make that announcement. So who is winding us up here?
I think Betsy and Deborah have an action item, and then Betsy's going to announce the November meeting.
Okay.
Well, our action item that Deborah and I came up with is not real concrete, but I think it's listening to conversation and our questions and in our breakout room. I think it's something that you might enjoy. And that is to pay attention to what percolates up for you out of all of this. Reflect on the connections among third act work and the ideas from Deborah's presentation and your own context, both geographically and within your own faith tradition, and kind of just see what ideas gel and what you might be able to do with those. Our next general meeting is November 7th with climate scientist Dr. Catherine Hayhoe as our speaker, and we're thrilled to have her. So because of her schedule, this is not going to be at the end of October, but rather the beginning of November on November 7th. Anything else, Jane Ellen?
I think that is it. I going to put on our closing music. Any questions, final questions? Like I said, our newsletter will be coming out in a couple days. So watch for details on everything you heard about. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram, where we will have links to the meetings, signups, and all that kind of stuff. And of course, you should all be on our email list. So I think that's all. Thank you all so much for being with us.
Save the chat.
I'll be save the chat. I'll be playing some music as we go.
That's
I'm not sure I did got to do the audio bit. Share sound.
I started waking every morning filled with sadness, fear, and dread. The world I took for granted was crashing to the ground, and I realized I might not live long enough to ever
Thank you, Jane Ellen.